The Christmas charity auction was supposed to be a night of warmth and generosity, but for Margaret Hale, it felt colder than the winter wind outside the community hall. She stood near the back, her heavy coat pulled tight around her broad frame, fingers gripping the handle of the woven basket she had worked on for weeks. Every item inside carried a piece of her heart. Apple bread baked before dawn, cinnamon rolls brushed with butter until they glistened, hand-stitched napkins sewn by lantern light, and a small jar of honey from the last hive her late husband had kept alive with patient care. She had imagined this basket bringing in enough money to cover firewood and maybe a sack of flour to last her through January. She had imagined smiles, kind words, maybe even a brief feeling of belonging. One by one, the baskets were lifted and praised. Laughter rippled through the hall as bids rose quickly for baskets decorated with ribbons and store-bought treats. Women in fitted coats and curled hair accepted applause, their cheeks flushed with pride. Margaret shifted her weight, trying to make herself smaller, though she knew there was no hiding her size. She had heard the whispers for years, about how much space she took up, how a woman like her should not expect kindness or desire. Still, she had hoped Christmas might soften hearts. When her name was finally called, the auctioneer lifted her basket and spoke its contents aloud. His voice echoed, then faded. Margaret waited, breath held, eyes fixed on the wooden floor. Seconds stretched. No hands rose. The silence felt loud, cruel. She dared a glance upward and met only quick looks away, tight smiles, and polite discomfort. Someone coughed. A chair scraped. The auctioneer tried again, lowering the starting bid, then lowered it once more. Nothing. Heat rushed to Margaret's face as shame curled in her stomach. She felt exposed, like the basket held not bread and honey, but every flaw people saw in her. At last, the auctioneer cleared his throat and moved on. A few sympathetic claps sounded, thin and hollow. Margaret swallowed hard, lifting the basket back into her arms. The weight of it was nothing compared to the heaviness pressing on her chest. She turned toward the exit, determined not to cry until she was alone. Each step felt slow, as though the room itself resisted her leaving, or perhaps it was her pride dragging behind her. She was almost at the door when a deep voice broke through the noise. Wait. Boots shifted, firm and unhurried. Margaret paused, heart hammering, afraid of pity or worse, mockery. She turned to see Caleb Wright standing near the wall, his broad shoulders filling his worn coat, his hat shadowing eyes that studied her not with judgment, but something steadier. Recognition flickered. Everyone knew the rancher who kept to himself and worked harder than most men half his age. Caleb stepped forward, the room falling quiet again, but this time the silence felt different. He reached for the basket, careful, as though it mattered. "This one hasn't been sold yet," he said, voice calm, certain. Margaret's hands trembled as she let him take it, unsure of what this moment would demand of her, and terrified to hope it might mean more than charity. Caleb set the basket on the auction table as if it were something valuable, not overlooked. He didn't rush, didn't perform. He simply stood there, one hand resting on the woven rim, and looked around the room. The low murmur that followed was uneasy, people shifting in their seats, unsure why this man had stepped into a moment already past. The auctioneer blinked, clearly uncertain, then gave a small nod. "Looks like we've got renewed interest," he said, forcing a cheerful tone. Caleb lifted his chin slightly. "I'll start it at 3 times what you asked," he said. His voice carried, steady and plain. A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd. A few eyebrows rose. Someone let out a short laugh, quickly stifled. The auctioneer hesitated, then repeated the bid, his tone suddenly bright. No one challenged it. Why would they? The same people who had looked away moments earlier now studied the basket as if seeing it for the first time, as if value could be conjured by money alone. Margaret stood frozen near the door, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. 3 times the amount. It was more than she'd hoped for, more than she thought she deserved after that silence. Her instinct was to protest, to tell him he didn't have to do this, that she was fine. But she wasn't fine, and the truth of that pressed against her ribs. She watched Caleb from a distance, noticing how he never glanced back at her for approval, never sought applause. He waited, calm, until the auctioneer brought the gavel down. "Sold," the auctioneer announced, relief and excitement blending in his voice. Applause followed, louder this time, as if people wanted to rewrite the moment before. Margaret felt her cheeks burn, but this time it wasn't from shame. It was confusion, disbelief, and something dangerously close to gratitude. She took a tentative step forward as Caleb picked up the basket again. He turned toward her then, his expression open, almost gentle. "These were made with care," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "That's worth paying for." He held the basket out, not pushing it into her hands, but offering it as though she had a choice. For a heartbeat, Margaret didn't move. No one had spoken to her like that in years, not since her husband's voice had faded from the kitchen they once shared. "I can't," she began, but her words faltered. She didn't know how to refuse without rejecting the dignity he was giving her. Caleb shook his head slightly. "It's already bought," he said. "But I was hoping you'd tell me about what's inside." His mouth curved into the faintest smile. "Especially the honey." A soft, unexpected sound escaped her, half laugh, half sob. She nodded, finding her voice at last. "My husband kept bees," she said. "I learned from him. They're stubborn creatures, but honest." Caleb listened, truly listened, as if every word mattered. Around them, the crowd slowly drifted back to its chatter, the moment passing for everyone else. But for Margaret, time felt suspended. As she spoke, she realized something was shifting, not just how others saw her, but how she saw herself. She was not invisible, she was not worthless, and as Caleb thanked her and tucked the basket under his arm, she sensed that this exchange was not ending at the auction table, but beginning somewhere far more uncertain and quietly hopeful. The hall began to empty as the auction wound down, coats pulled on and goodbyes exchanged, but Margaret lingered near the edge of the room, unsure where to place herself now that the weight of the basket was gone. Her hands felt strangely empty. She watched Caleb speak briefly with the auctioneer, then step aside, waiting rather than leaving. That alone felt deliberate. When he finally approached her again, the noise of the hall had softened into a distant hum, like snowfall against windows. "I was heading back toward the ranch," he said. "Road passes your place, doesn't it?" His tone was casual, as if offering a simple courtesy, not a test. Margaret nodded. "Just past the old cottonwood," she replied. They walked out together into the cold night, their breath forming pale clouds. The stars were sharp and bright, and the air smelled of pine and wood smoke. Caleb carried the basket easily, but he didn't hurry. He matched her slower steps. Without comment, as they walked, Margaret found herself talking about the winter that had come early, about the roof that still leaked in the back room, about how quiet the house felt after sunset. She didn't know why she trusted him with these details, only that he listened the way few people ever had, without interrupting, without turning her words into advice or pity. When they reached the bend in the road where her small house sat dark and waiting, she hesitated, embarrassed by its sagging porch and unshoveled path. Caleb stopped beside her. "I'll walk you to the door," he said simply. Inside, the house smelled faintly of baked apples and cold ashes. Margaret lit a lamp, its glow filling the kitchen with warm yellow light. For a moment, they stood there, unsure of the next step. Then Caleb set the basket on the table and lifted the lid. He examined each item slowly, as if cataloging effort rather than food. "You didn't cut corners," he said. "That matters." Margaret felt a tightness in her chest, but it wasn't pain. "People don't usually notice," she admitted. Caleb met her eyes. "I do." The words settled between them, heavy and sincere. He cleared his throat and reached into his coat, pulling out folded bills and placing them beside the basket. "For the basket," he said. "And for your time. If you'd be willing, I could use someone like you. Ranch needs help with cooking during calving season. Paid work." The offer stunned her. Not charity. Work. Respect. She nodded slowly, afraid to speak in case the moment broke. Caleb smiled, fuller this time, then turned toward the door. "I'll be by Monday," he said. When he left, the house felt different, still quiet, but no longer empty. Margaret sat at the table long after, touching the napkins, breathing in the scent of cinnamon. Outside, the cold pressed against the windows, but inside, something had shifted. For the first time in years, she felt seen, not despite who she was, but because of it.